Andrew, thank you very much for joining us today. As part of our digital dialogues, we're always keen to find out a little bit more about tech leaders and those who are leading in the tech community. So for those looking and watching at home, could you say a little bit more about yourself, your job, and what you do?
Sure. Firstly, thank you very much for the opportunity, Matt. So my name is Andrew Roughan. I'm CEO of 𝗵𝗄𝗄. 𝗵𝗄𝗄 is an innovation company that was actually born out of the government's plans for Olympic legacy. So we have our heritage at a site on the Olympic Park, which used to be the TV studios. And we're trying to become this orchestrator of innovation. So where we bring together government, academia, industry and startups in order to drive change broadly related to technology and government's policies on their priority technology areas.
And so the Olympic Park is your home, but I think you've got some bases elsewhere in the country as well, haven't you?
That's right, yeah. So we were very much born in London, but had an ambition to have national and international effect. So we've currently got 7 locations around the UK, predominantly London, Manchester and Cheltenham. And what we use those locations are as almost vectors into the local communities. But as a result of that, we've got projects which are currently working in places like Scarborough, in Stockton-on-Tees, in Preston, in Cardiff, to name but a few.
And so some of those areas, Preston, Scarborough that you mentioned there, they're not traditionally what you'd associate with the tech sector or thinking about those locations that the tech sector operates in, but they're crucial for tech ecosystems across the UK and our economy as well. Have you seen interest in them and them start to grow in the same way that we normally associate Manchester or Birmingham or other areas growing?
Yes, so I mean, there's a real science behind why we are in those locations. So our focus, as I alluded to, is around government-led innovation, particularly in the fields of national security and emerging technologies, and very much the intersection of those two things. Now, interestingly, places like particularly Scarborough and Preston are really interesting from a national security perspective. So Scarborough, I think there's a GCHQ location there that dates back to World War I. Which was a lot of the radio infrastructure that was picking up communications and signals facing the east during World War I. And as a result, I've got a really deep history in communications and radio and all of the industry that's spawned from that. So in the places like Scarborough, what we're trying to achieve is to help use that as a catalyst for a new economy. So with levelling up policy and how we help local communities diversify what they do and how they do it in order to drive social regeneration as a result. So better employment opportunities, better education opportunities, higher value jobs, better wages, bigger aspirations for the community. In a similar way, Preston, so that whole corridor starting at Manchester and probably actually ending up in Belfast with a little hop along the water, but the richness in data science and kind of new forms of employment, I think is quite incredible, broadly because of the great skills and talent there, but also the university infrastructure is really, really important. So we really love been involved in projects like that, because I think particularly with levelling up as a policy area, that that is the opportunity for the economy, that is the growth area. So particularly delighted to be working in those locations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that more companies who are seeing the opportunities in these areas as well, and the opportunities for people upskilling, businesses growing and expanding out of them, that's absolutely excellent. Thinking about yourself then, so you can't have always been at 𝗵𝗄𝗄. And so what was it that first interested you in the tech sector or technology in general?
My career has been a bit of a wandering journey, actually, that I'm not sure I've made some particularly positive decisions to land in the destinations I've ended up. But my first foray into technology was in 2004, where I managed to apply for a job in the telecommunications sector. So I worked for an organisation called 𝗗𝗶𝗴𝗶 but I went in, I was 24 at the time. I went in as a relatively recent graduate, and my first job had been in procurement, so that was kind of my pathway. So it certainly wasn't a technology related role. What I found though was that I've got a broad kind of general management skill set, and I found myself able to understand the language of technology, able to simplify it enough so that I understood technically what was going on, and as a result of that, being able to communicate it to others in a way that they would understand as well if they weren't technologists. And that kind of sparked almost all of my opportunities that followed, actually. So being able to go into quite technology heavy roles, but being able to break it down into its simplest form and then make it logical as to what we would do next. So I went from the telecommunications sector, where I spent guts of 10 years doing mergers and acquisitions, integrations of companies, leading product teams, leading operational teams, and then I went into the data center sector. But this part of the data center sector was, it was pre-cloud. It wasn't actually about the server and what was processing on the server. It was actually about the mechanical, electrical side of the building. So how do you power these things and make them safe for use? But it really was the precursor to how cloud is enabled in the UK. And then from there, I was lucky enough to get involved in the Olympic legacy planning, and what followed that was 𝗲𝗄𝗄𝗧 and now 𝗪𝗏𝗄𝗧.
And you said something there about actually the language that gets used in the technology sector as well. Do you, it sometimes was quite exclusive, and I think made people think it was some sort of black magic that was taking place elsewhere. Do you think that that's got better, or have we got worse as technology's improved?
I think generally society is more conversant with the language now, which I think is a good thing. I do think those in the tech sector are a little bit lazy about the use of words, though, and some of our heritage is in cybersecurity, and I think cyber, particularly as a word, is massively misused, because I think if you use it just as that part of the word cybersecurity, but you just say cyber, it means very different things to many different people. So some people think about cyber as just the digital domain, so the whole of everything that is digital. Other people use it as shorthand for cybersecurity, which is obviously a pervasive but omnipresent layer within the digital domain, but it doesn't talk to the vast arrays of other activity going on. I think that's quite a good example around if we're using language, we should be very specific about it, and we should, to your point around inclusivity or exclusivity, is making sure that we cater for the audience we're talking to make sure that they understand the context of what's been said and the point of view that's been broadcast, to the point where we can bring them into the conversation and get their ideas. Because as I illustrated, my career doesn't come from any technological revolution in my mind. It's more commerciality, logic, experience, and actually if I can contribute to a debate because the language allows me to, then I'll have a point of view that might be helpful to steer it forward.
Absolutely, no, and I think getting that language right is what's going to help us grow the tech sector across the UK, but get more people engaged and be more diverse, definitely. Now I know you're in Cheltenham today, but what does a normal day, week look like for you, Andrew? Where are you always in Cheltenham? Are you travelling around, or is it or is it on the Olympic Park where you base yourself most of the time?
So I live in Reading, so relatively central in the south of the country, which wasn't by design, because obviously it's quite a long way to most of the destinations I end up. One interesting thing that COVID taught me when everyone was locked down and inevitably working from home, was I genuinely realised that I'm a little bit introverted when it comes to work. And I found myself on a day-to-day basis during COVID, just writing long lists and being a very individual contributor, just getting through those lists and tasks, but not really communicating effectively with others and not delegating very well, and sometimes not including others in the progress that was being made. And what that taught me was that actually I'm typically reticent to work from home, more because I need to be around people in order to get, to collaborate with them. And just from a personality style, I find it much easier to include people if I'm physically in the room with them. So that tends to be my style. So a long way of saying 5 days a week, I'm typically in an office. I would say probably 3 of those days tend to be in London, more because kind of the scale of our colleagues, probably 60% of my colleagues sit in London and 40% are outside of London. I'll certainly be in one of Cheltenham and Manchester once a week, and then probably a client location one other day.
Yeah, so definitely getting around the country and getting to see all of the UK as well. And you said there about that lessons learned from COVID, being a little bit introvert. Did that surprise you? Did you always think you were a little introvert, or?
I don't think I'd had the reason to think about it too much. I think when I analyze it now, though, it was pretty obvious. Kind of knowing my style, that my career has always been a really good number two, i.e. help the person I report to be better and achieve more and have more kind of horsepower or shoulder behind them. And I think in a role, as chief exec, you kind of you're number two to no one. You've got to lead your own charge. And I think that transition for me, made me realize quite a lot about my own personality and how I dealt with things, that now I don't have anyone to serve. It exposes my behaviors a little bit more, not in any particularly bad way or good way, but just in a way that makes me understand the tools I have at my availability.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. And you mentioned, Cheltenham, Manchester, London, but there's other locations. You've got to be doing some really exciting pieces of work. What's the most exciting bit of your job?
So 𝗵𝗵𝗴𝗶, we try and be very definitive about what we do in a quite unclear marketplace or a niche marketplace. So we call ourselves an innovation company. What we specifically mean by that is understanding how clusters and ecosystems work, and positioning ourselves right in the middle so that we can see everyone involved. And that when we're true believers that collaboration will cause progress, but we need to know what each of the collaborators want out of the coming together. And what we try and become is we know everyone, so we bring them together. We project manage their engagement and their collaboration, and we make sure that when they go back to their home destinations, they've achieved what they wanted to. Now, that's a really long way of saying, but almost an orchestrator of outcomes. And I think that's what 𝗵𝗴𝗶𝗴𝗀's charting its course for now, is to become this kind of master orchestrator in emerging tech and national security, but knowing what universities, what investors, what startups, what citizens, what government departments, what regulators and so on need out of coming together, and get them out of their natural habitat and get them engaging with people they wouldn't otherwise collide with. And that's what 𝗵𝗴𝗶𝗴𝗀 becomes expert in. And I haven't answered your question, which I'll come back to. So in terms of the most exciting things we work on, is we're working alongside QinetiQ, the very large technology integrator, on a project called the Accelerated Capability Environment, which is a cross-government platform for experimentation. And what that does is that it gives typically a 12-week period for a government who wants to try something to see if it works. And it goes into a broad community of people who can suggest how things work and how it comes about. And one of the projects they're famous for is they put sensors in the wastewater network during COVID in order to experiment around, could you spot localized outbreaks of COVID via bacteria in water? And as a result of that, could you position medical supplies really intelligently in order to match those outbreaks? So it's things like that that really, really motivate me around, seeing what technology can do for society, and, genuinely see where it can make a difference, rather than, with respect to my more software-based colleagues, but where, it's lines of code that are doing something in the background of a back office somewhere in some deep industry that doesn't affect society is less interesting and motivating for me.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, the example you gave there is one that not only changes the way we look at things, the way we tackle issues, the way you gear everything like that, but saves lives as well, ultimately, when you're doing this. And I think that the potential for technology to do that is incredible as well. Thinking about your job, you get to work with some brilliant people, working across some excellent organizations as well. But if you weren't doing your job, you could do any other job, what would you want to be doing?
I'll say this somewhat guardedly, but I am really, really lucky that I am able to work on the mission of the public sector whilst being rewarded like the private sector. And I say that very specifically because I think it's quite rare. And I'm so impassioned by the mission of the public sector that I think my answer to the question is I'd love to be a really senior civil servant. I'd love to be in the machinery of government without the politics, which I know you can't opt out of that, but without the politics, but seeing how this big machine works and finding a way through the difficult bureaucracies, seeing the impact it can have and positioning policy in that direction. My next life, I'd kind of commit to myself that if I can make a big success of 𝗵𝗵𝗆 and we can have the impact that we intend to, if there's ever a change of my fortunes or my availability, I'd love to go into the public sector and see it from the other side.
Do it from that side as well. And I guess because of the nature of your work, there's so much that public sector can learn from private, but that private can learn from public sector as well to help improve things.
Definitely, and I think I use the word mission there, and I'm very mission oriented, and I realised that in my career, the times at which I've been serving a mission have certainly been the times when I've been performing my best, because it gives me something to believe in, it gives me something to aim for. But I think there's specific characteristics of the mission in question that I think are really important to me around how noble it is. So for me, it can't just be about shareholder return. There has to be something broader and bigger, and you can see it and you can see who benefits from it, not just monetarily. And so as a result of that, I think that's why public sector I think is so important and exciting, because the mission is that of the nation. And that will change from time to time, but it's so easy to see and so easy to buy into. And of course, you have to take the highs with the lows, but to be proud to be lucky enough to live in this country and grow up in this country, to be able to contribute in good times and in bad times to its progress, I think is really important.
Absolutely. And if I take a little bit of a different tack then and take you back to a young Andrew, and take you back to sort of 16 and think, who inspired you maybe when you were going through school or first entering work? Who inspired you growing up and you thought, actually, I want to be like that person, or I really value what that person's doing and I want to do something like them?
Yeah, so I mean, at that type of age, I think it was quite driven by competition. So looking at peers at school and thinking about anything I could measure myself against them with, whether it be academic or sport or social progress, dare I say it. But I think particularly I've got an older sister who's about 5 years older than me, who always set the benchmark. And I'm sure that's true of a lot of people around the siblings, who you always try and measure up to them and say, well, if I'm making that progress, then it can't be a bad thing. Or if I can nudge ahead, then there's a watermark there that I'm above. And that inspired me actually to choose what I did for A levels, what I chose to do at university, not necessarily because the subject matter in question was the thing I wanted to end up doing, but it was the only thing I could see and the only thing I knew. So almost using it as a guide stick to, well, if I head in that direction, it feels safe and I can see progress being caused. Therefore, there's a channel for me. Now I don't necessarily think that was the wisest move. If I had hindsight and my time again, I think I should have been a bit more calculated, a bit more searching of my own motivations and what excited me. But I think what it then led to in my early career was my understanding of forming networks. So almost put someone in front of me and I'll catch up with them. And that that could be in a peer-to-peer or a junior to senior fashion. And that really charted my first 10 years of my career, really, of just constantly every year put someone in front of me, measure myself, get to them, and then think again, what can I do next?
And if you were going back and speaking to your younger self then and giving them some advice, I think you're alluding to it there, what would you say then?
Think harder.
Think harder. That's a good piece of advice. Nice and succinct as well. And you mentioned the social aspect and also playing sport and things. When you're not being CEO of 𝗵𝗆𝗆, what is it that you do to unwind? What do you do? Take your mind off all of these big challenges that you're having to deal with?
Yeah, I mean the downside of working for 𝗵𝗆𝗆𝗆 at its current stage. So we're 6 years old. We're 75 employees. We're trying to grow by 50% this year. I'm sad to say it's currently a 7-day-a-week job. which is not enviable or certainly anything I'd suggest to anyone. So I work really hard, and I say that I don't resent it at all. I really enjoy it. It really motivates me, and I carve the time out in order to be able to do it. The saving grace of that is that I've got a family. I've got 2 children, so an 11-year-old and a 6-year-old, and the combination of those 2 things of family life and a heavy work burden pretty much occupies my spare time. So really enjoy the lucky times I'm available to go on holiday. In working hard, I've got great relationships with colleagues that allow some downtime and some kind of mutual engagement. But family is the thing that almost I need to serve my kids. I need to give them my example. I need to help them chart their own path, but give them the opportunities that maybe I didn't have, or slightly better opportunities than I did.
I think you said something really interesting there as well, Andrew, about it's a big job, 7 days a week. It can be all consuming. You said, I don't resent it. I've spoken to some people in the tech sector, and you get that feeling that they sometimes do. And I wonder how they motivate themselves. It's very clear how you motivate yourself, because it's the mission, as you've said. But do you think that can be detrimental? It can really damage some tech leaders, that they just take on too much too soon?
Definitely. And the reality is you can only do it for a short period of time, working at that intensity, and until your performance degrades, or health issues emerge and things like that, which is never advisable.
Yeah.
I do think it's something slightly different in what I do, whether I've got rose tinted glasses on or not, is the sense of ownership, the sense of autonomy, the sense of achievement when you get to the mini milestone that you've created. Whereas I think in particularly large organizations, it's quite difficult to see through those things. And if all you've got is a heavy workload that requires you to work silly hours, and but you can't really see who the beneficiaries are in this thing. I think if you work for a big cloud company or something, one of the hyperscalers, you say, well, actually, where is this milestone? Because another $100 million of revenue, sounds lovely, but I can't see who it's benefiting in the forest that sits in front of me. So I can see working for particularly large organizations, or organizations where there's not clarity of what next and where the downtime comes from, that it can get really frustrating and really harmful as well. And once people disengage from their motivation, then I've got this phrase, you quit and stay.
Yeah, that's a good phrase as well. Yeah, they're not necessarily helpful to the company, those people, either, or helpful to themselves.
Yeah.
And before we close, thinking ahead then, and we've got massive changes that have come down the lines of the last 10 years, but even in the last year or so in terms of technology, where do you see some of the big challenges for the tech sector, but also some of the big opportunities for innovation as well?
Yeah, so I think we focus selfishly on 4 areas relative to that. So cybersecurity I mentioned earlier on. So I think the pervasiveness of cybersecurity is becoming very, very real, if it wasn't previously. And particularly, I think we're just about to enter a generation where cybersecurity is no longer just about economic risk, it's about life and safety. And I think that changes the paradigm materially. And I think people will forgive cyber breaches for economic harm. They would never forgive a cyber breach that caused a life safety issue. And I think that's particularly a pertinent moment that we're just about to enter. Second thing, so future of the internet. So particularly with the online safety legislation that's currently going through, I think there's time for a reflection around the kind of net effect of the internet. So it's enabled so much, but it's also created a very different dimension to the world that wasn't necessarily designed or expected. I think there's an opportunity, given where geopolitics, where available technology, where society is going, to reflect a little bit around what we want the future of the internet to look like. So, should there be segregated internets where industry has one flavor, citizens have another flavor, countries or trading blocks might have overlapping but interfacing flavors of internet. And the moment to retake control of its future. This kind of federated, decentralized model can still be pulled back in and redesigned. And I think that's a particular opportunity. Next, I think future of compute. So I say that quite advisedly around, understanding what cloud has brought in terms of enabling, scale and economic use of compute infrastructure. I think with quantum and all that it promises, I think it becomes a bit of an arms race. I think that from a political perspective, I think there's lots of countries talking a good game on quantum, not, in my humble opinion, not a lot of people really leading the charge around who wins the arms race. So particularly with things like cryptography, that it will change the world in which we operate in, and it could change it for several years before one is able to catch up on it. And I think more needs to be done in that field. And then finally, of course, AI, which I won't labour too much because you'll hear it 7 times today. But that whole debate around friend or foe, that it can enable so much, and it will bring society so much, but it needs ethics, it needs standards, it needs interoperability and accessibility. But it's a really exciting time. I'm certainly an optimist about what we can do over the course of the next few years, but also we need to hold people to account to make sure that we've got the right hand on the tiller.
Absolutely. And with those challenges and opportunities in equal measure, it presents a great place for Plexl to be working in and bringing people together and encouraging that innovation too. Andrew, it just leaves me to say thank you very much for your time. Congratulations to Plexl on your 6th birthday, and to you for your techUK President's Award last week. It's been brilliant talking with you. Thank you for your time.
Brilliant. Thank you, Matt.